My name is Brittany Holloway. I am 30 years old. And I found out what my parents really thought of me from a hospital bed 6 hours after they wheeled me out of an operating room. 4 weeks earlier, I had given birth to my son, Beckett, by emergency C-section after 31 hours of labor that ended in a uterine tear. Then a follow-up infection turned septic on a Tuesday afternoon. And I went back under for an emergency hysterectomy at 4 p.m. I came up out of the anesthesia at 11:08 that night, with a fresh incision across my abdomen, a Foley catheter taped to my thigh, and the steady mechanical beep of a heart monitor counting out the minutes I had been alive without knowing it. My husband, Drev, was somewhere over Kansas on a southwest red-eye from Phoenix. Someone had to care for my 4-week-old son that night. My mother lived 12 minutes from the hospital. She said no. She told my husband one sentence. And that sentence is, "The reason you are here. That baby is not our problem. Your sister needs us for her trip tomorrow." My sister was driving to a girls' weekend in Sedona 3 nights at a wellness resort, paid for in part by a deposit that had cleared from my checking account the previous Thursday. My mother had committed to driving the 4 hours with her. To help her unwind, what I did from that hospital bed in the next 4 minutes ended 7 years and $378,000. And that is not even the part that broke them. The part that broke them walked through the door 3 hours later. A tall, slow-moving man in a Carhartt jacket, carrying a worn leather portfolio, and he stopped at the foot of my bed, looked down at me, and said something none of them ever expected to hear out loud. "Welcome to Quiet Reckoning, the channel where dependable people finally close the account. If someone in your life has ever treated your steadiness as a renewable resource, this story is for you. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. And tell me who actually showed up the day you could not show up for yourself. And be sure to subscribe. The part with my grandfather is the part you will remember. I want to tell you about the phone call because that is where it starts. I came up out of the anesthesia in a recovery room at Banner University Medical Center in Phoenix. The first thing I felt was the catheter. Then the pressure of the surgical binder around my abdomen. Then the cold trickle of IV fluid into the back of my left hand. A nurse named Anna was checking my blood pressure for the 3rd time. My husband Drew was on speaker on the pillow beside my head, and his voice was doing that careful, flat thing it does when he is scared, and trying not to sound scared. "Britt, the neighbor can only stay till midnight. I called your mom. I knew before he finished. She won't come." There was a pause. And behind the pause, I could hear what he wasn't saying, the rumbling whine of a jet engine, the dim chatter of a Southwest flight attendant doing the safety walkthrough. Drew was somewhere over the Texas-Oklahoma border, with 3 hours and 40 minutes between his shoulder and my hand. She said the baby is not their problem. Drew said, "She said your sister needs them tomorrow for Sedona, a wellness retreat. My 4-week-old son needed someone for the night." My mother had been told her daughter had just come out of an emergency hysterectomy with a fresh 6-inch incision and a septic infection and a husband on a flight. And the answer was a wellness retreat. I did not cry. I want you to understand that part because everyone expects the woman in the recovery room to fall apart, and I did not. I looked at the IV taped to the back of my hand. I looked at the white ceiling tile with the small pattern of holes I had memorized in the 11 minutes I had been awake. Then I reached over with my left hand and pulled my phone off the bedside table. I had a great deal to take care of, and I was very good at taking care of things. That had always been the problem. You should know who I was before that night, because it explains why my family treated me the way a thermostat treats a room. I grew up in a small ranch house in Mesa, Arizona, on a street where the lawns were rocks and the mailboxes were faded. My father, Doug Holloway, was a long-haul trucker, gone 21 days a month. My mother, Patty, stayed home and resented every minute of it. My younger sister Kennedy was the wanted one, the planned one, The one for whom my mother kept a baby book and saved every art class drawing. I was the surprise. Born 3 years before they were ready. In a year when the trucking company had cut my father's routes in half, I paid for community college by working third shift at a Walgreens pharmacy counter. I transferred to Arizona State on a scholarship and clawed my way into a healthcare administration program. Nobody in my family understood. By 28, I was the operations director of a regional hospital system's outpatient division. The person they put in the room when a billing audit had to be reconciled or a clinic had to be opened or closed in under 90 days. I read process flows and spreadsheets for a living. Numbers do not have favorites. And they do not lie to your face. Which is more than I could say for some people. Drew and I married at 26 and tried for kids almost immediately. It took us 4 years and 2 miscarriages to get Beckett. We did not have a lot left over after the IVF rounds. But we lived below our means in a quiet way. Nobody noticed. 2 incomes. 1 used Honda. No consumer debt. That is the only reason what I am about to tell you was even possible. For 7 years, I had been sending my parents $4,500 a month. I never said the number out loud. Not to my husband. Not to my sister. Not to a soul. I told myself it was for my father's COPD inhalers and the small mortgage they were trying to pay off before he retired. I told myself I was the only one steady enough to carry it. And being the steady one had become its own kind of identity. I am telling you this now so you understand. I was not naive. I was responsible to the point of self-erasure. There is a difference. And that night, in a recovery room at Banner, I finally learned what the difference was. The first thing I did was not revenge. The first thing I did was solve the actual problem because that is what I do. With my left thumb, I pulled up the number for a licensed overnight newborn care agency in the Phoenix area that Drew and I had pre-registered with 2 weeks before Beckett was due. A woman answered on the second ring. I told her my name, my situation, and my address in 8 sentences. Calm as a Tuesday. I need an overnight caregiver for a 4-week-old boy. Starting now. Possibly 2 nights. The baby is healthy. I am the patient. The father is on a flight from Phoenix to Phoenix. He is connecting through Vegas. The house is unlocked. Garage code 6279. The bottles are in the warmer. The crib is in the back bedroom on the left. She asked if the baby was medically stable. He is perfect. I am the one in the hospital. 43 minutes later, a caregiver named Yolanda Vega let herself into my house with the code Drew had given her, washed her hands at the kitchen sink, and texted me a photograph of Beckett asleep in his crib with one fist against his mouth and his other hand spread flat against the soft yellow blanket Drew's mother had crocheted for him 3 weeks before she died of cancer last spring. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Anna, the recovery nurse, came in to check my vitals and saw me holding the phone, and she asked gently if I had family who could come. It's handled, I said. Next. Anna blinked. People always blink when you do not perform the breakdown they are braced for. I was not being cold. I was triaging the way you do when you have spent your whole life being the only adult in a room full of adults. My son was warm and watched and safe. My husband was in the air. My incision would heal. The sepsis was responding to the antibiotics. There was exactly 1 item left on the list that night. One I had carried for 7 years and never once allowed myself to touch, and now my left hand was free. And my mind was very clear. I opened my banking app. The login screen glowed in the dim recovery room like a small cold moon. Inside the app, on the 3rd screen down, there is a section called Recurring Transfers. And I had 4 of them. I knew them by heart the way you know a scar. The first was labeled Mom and Dad Household, $2. Ling ling ling. The second said Dad, Medical $1. eBay. The third said, mortgage assist $900. The fourth, the one I had set up 4 years ago and never named clearly, said only, family support $500. $4,500 on the first of every month. For 84 months. I had set the first one up at 23 years old. The night my mother called me sobbing that the COBRA on my father's healthcare had run out and she had been afraid to tell me. I had set the fourth one up at 26. On a Sunday afternoon. After my mother told me Kennedy had been laid off from a marketing internship and the family just needed a little more breathing room until your sister got back on her feet. Kennedy had never gotten back on her feet. Kennedy had instead become a lifestyle blogger with 28,000 Instagram followers and a leased Audi Q5. I had never once added up the total. I had carefully not added up the total. The total had felt like a door I could not walk back through. So I made myself look. The app did the math without asking my permission. $378,000. Almost $400,000. Gone out of my life. One quiet automated transfer at a time. While my mother told her cousins at Cracker Barrel that Doug and I are just trying to make it work on a fixed income, I pressed cancel on the first transfer. A pale green checkmark appeared. And a single line of text I will remember until I die. Recurring transfer canceled. I pressed cancel on the second. Recurring transfer canceled. The third. The fourth. 4 taps. Maybe 19 seconds. And 7 years simply stopped. The way a faucet stops when you turn the handle all the way to the right. I felt no triumph. I felt no grief. I felt a strange flat clarity. The way a process feels when a stuck job finally clears and the queue empties. Then, as I was about to close the app, my eyes caught on something in the transaction history I had never bothered to scroll into before. A line item. 1 year back. Buried under the Dad Medical label. It read, lump payment K $18. Ling ling ling. My sister's initial. Not my father's medical beaving. Kennedy. I locked the phone screen and laid it on the blanket. The catheter line tugged at my thigh when I shifted. Anna came back in to check on my pain levels and saw my face and asked if I needed more morphine. Not the kind you can give me. I told her. And I tried to smile so she would not flag it in the chart. After she left, I lay in the dim recovery room listening to the monitor count my heartbeats. And I made myself sit with the question I had been avoiding for 7 years. Why had I done it? The easy answer, the one strangers offer in comment sections, is that I was a pushover desperate for parental love. That answer is wrong. And if you have ever been the dependable one, you already know why. I did it because somewhere along the way, I had decided that being needed was the same as being safe. If I was the load-bearing wall, no one could remove me from the building. I was buying my position in my own family, one direct deposit at a time. My grandfather understood that about me before I did. His name is Lloyd Holloway. My father's father, a tall, slow-moving man who smells like Old Spice and diesel and who has not raised his voice once in the 79 years he has been on this earth. Lloyd drove a long-haul truck for 38 years, retired at 65, and has lived in the same brick rancher in a small town outside Tucson, Marana, Arizona, since 1981, the summer before my wedding, when I was 25. He took me out to his back porch one Saturday morning and handed me a cup of coffee and said, Britt, somebody in this family is going to have to be the break. Your daddy never could and your mama won't. So it's going to have to be you. I had thought he meant be careful with your money for your husband's sake. I think now, lying in that recovery room with the bank app still open under my thumb, that he had meant something much more specific. He had meant don't let them drain you. Child. My grandmother Pearl, Lloyd's wife of 54 years, had passed in March of last year. 8 months before Beckett was conceived, she had gone quietly in her sleep on a Sunday morning, Lloyd had called me himself at 6:15 a.m., his voice steady, and said only, "Pearl's gone. I made the calls. Don't drive down till sunup." That had been Lloyd's whole way of moving through the world. Make the calls. Don't drive at night. I had been too pregnant and too buried in a clinic conversion project at work to ask Lloyd what Pearl had left him or how he was managing afterward. I had assumed my parents had handled it, the way I had assumed my money was buying my father's inhalers. I had spent a lifetime assuming the best about people who had never once earned that assumption. And calling that assumption family. Lying in that recovery room with my son, 17 miles away in a stranger's careful arms, I finally understood that I had been funding a story about my family. Not the actual family. The actual family had chosen a wellness retreat. Drew called back from the gate at Las Vegas, where he had landed for his 30-minute connection. And this time, he told me everything my mother had said, word for word, because he knew I would want it that way. He had called her at 8:46 p.m. He had explained that I was out of surgery, that the hysterectomy had taken longer than expected, that I had been septic, that the baby needed someone overnight. Just one night. Possibly two. And that he was on the next flight. He had asked her to please drive the 12 minutes from their house to ours and stay until he could get there at 3 a.m. My mother had sighed her long theatrical sigh. The one she has used since I was 8 years old to signal that you have asked her for too much. Drev. Honey. Your sister-in-law needs us tomorrow. Kennedy has been planning this Sedona trip with her girlfriends for 2 months. She has put down a deposit. The reservations cannot be moved. And besides, that baby is not our problem. Brittany has always managed. What Brittany had always managed, my mother had not bothered to say, was Patty and Doug's mortgage assistance, and Doug's cobbed prescriptions, and a 7-year stream of cash she was about to discover she could not actually live without. Brittany. Drew said softly into the phone from the Las Vegas gate. I am so sorry. I am so sorry I am not there. It's not on you. I said. Come home safely. The baby is handled. I hung up. I lay in the dim recovery room with the bank app still glowing on the locked screen. And I waited. I knew my mother. She would discover the canceled transfers on the 1st of the month, when no deposit landed. And she would call me. And her voice would be warm at the start, the way it always was when she wanted something. I had 9 days to be ready. I would be ready. What I did not know, what I could not have known, at 11:31 p.m. on that Tuesday night in that recovery room at Banner, was that my grandfather Lloyd had been in his rancher in Marana since 7 o'clock. And that at 9:50 p.m. his phone had rung with my mother on the other end. Lloyd had taken the call sitting in the wooden rocking chair on his front porch, the same rocking chair his wife Pearl had picked out at a Mesa estate sale in 1984. He had listened in silence for 2 minutes, while my mother explained, in her careful charity voice, that Brittany had gotten herself into another situation, and would Lloyd please consider making the 2-hour drive up to Phoenix to sit with the baby for a night or two. Lloyd had asked one question. Did Patty already tell you no? Doug, my father, had paused. Then he had told the truth, because he could not lie to his father. Daddy, Patty has plans with Kennedy, Lloyd had said. All right. So. And he had hung up. Lloyd had then sat on the rocking chair for about 8 minutes. He had watched the saguaro across the road turn from gold to gray. He had thought about his late wife Pearl, and what she had told him in March, the week before she died. When the hospice nurse had stepped out of the room and the morphine had not yet pulled her under, he had thought about a folder in a fireproof safe in his bedroom closet, a folder he had not opened in 7 months. And then Lloyd had stood up. Slowly, because of the bad knee that had been getting worse since Pearl passed. And he had gone inside. and he had put on a clean flannel shirt and the Carhartt jacket Pearl had given him for his 75th birthday. And he had taken the folder out of the safe. And he had gotten into the 2014 Silverado he had owned since it rolled off the dealer's lot. And he had driven 1 hour and 47 minutes through the dark, from Marana up I-10 to Phoenix to find his granddaughter. He arrived at the front desk of the surgical recovery floor at Banner University Medical Center at exactly 2:03 a.m. and asked the night clerk where to find Brittany Holloway. The clerk asked if he was family. Lloyd looked at her over his reading glasses. The way an old man looks at a young woman who is trying to do her job, and he said gently, "I'm what's left of it." Lloyd walked through the door of my recovery room at 2:05 a.m. with the leather portfolio under his left arm and the Carhartt jacket still buttoned up against the desert cold. He did not say hello. He did not ask if I was okay. He set the portfolio on the chair beside the bed, took off his jacket, folded it once over the back of the chair, and put his big calloused hand over my left hand where the IV tape was already starting to peel up. Britt, he said. "Where's the boy?" I told him about Yolanda. I showed him the photograph the agency had texted me. Lloyd looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at me. "Your daddy called me when he heard about the sepsis." Lloyd said, "Doug called me at 6 o'clock this evening. He said you were going under at 4. And he was worried because Drew was still in Phoenix on the work site. He asked me if I'd take a run-up. I tend to check on the baby. Then your mama got on the line and said no. That wasn't necessary. That they would handle it. So I sat home. I figured Patty meant what she said." He paused. He looked at the catheter line, the IV bag, the surgical binder, the slow, careful gaze of a man who had buried a wife in a hospital exactly like this one 8 months ago. Then Patty called me back at 9:50 and asked if I'd come after all. And I knew. I asked him what he knew. Lloyd said, "I knew your mama had already told someone else no first. And I knew it was probably you." He did not open the portfolio that night. He sat with me until 4:30 a.m. And we did not talk about money, or my sister, or my mother. He told me about a route he used to drive through New Mexico, the one that ran north out of Las Cruces through Hatch and up into the Gila, and about a waitress at a truck stop in Deming named Lupe Ortiz, who had given him a thermos for his 60th birthday after he had been stopping at her counter for 19 years. I let him talk, the sound of his voice that low, slow. Sonoran drawl was the first thing in 10 hours that had reminded me I was a person with a history and not a hospital chart. At 4:30, Lloyd stood up, kissed the top of my head, and told me he would be back in the morning after he stopped at the house to look in on Beckett and Yolanda. "I'll leave the portfolio with the nurse," he said. "You don't need to open it yet. You need to sleep." He gave the portfolio to Anna at the nurse's station and asked her to bring it back to me in the morning. After I had eaten and the doctor had been by, Anna, who had seen many older men carry many folders into many recovery rooms in her career, simply said, "Yes, sir," and put the portfolio behind the desk. I slept 4 hours, which was more than I had slept in any 24-hour period since Beckett had been born. I want to skip forward, because the next 2 weeks are where the real work happened. And most of it happened on a laptop, on a hospital tray table, and then, later, on the couch in my own living room with a heating pad against the incision, and Beckett asleep in a bassinet at my feet. The morning after Lloyd's visit, I asked Drew's older sister, Mariana, who works as a forensic auditor for a state insurance fraud unit in Tucson, to drive up to Phoenix for the weekend. Mariana arrived at the house Saturday at noon with a duffel bag, a French press, and a small portable printer she had bought specifically for this trip from a Staples on Speedway Boulevard. "You and I are going to do some bookkeeping," she told me. We did. While Yolanda fed Beckett and rocked him on the back patio in the warm Arizona December sun, Mariana and I logged into my bank, exported 84 months of statements, and dropped them into a pivot table. This is what I do for a regional hospital systems operations division. I reconcile audit findings against 3 different ERP systems and present clean variance reports to a board that does not have time for explanations. I can certainly do it for my own life. I sorted the $378,000 by where it had actually landed. I filtered by date, payee, withdrawal location, and category code. I cross-referenced every transfer with the corresponding withdrawal on my parents' account, which I had access to as a co-signer on their checking, a co-signer status my mother had added me to in 2018 when she had needed help disputing a fraudulent charge and had simply forgotten to remove me afterward. The picture that assembled itself, cell by cell, was not the picture my mother had painted at Cracker Barrel for the last 7 years. The medical expenses I had thought I was covering, my father's COPD inhalers, the cardiologist visits, his sleep apnea machine, came to about $38,000 across the whole 7 years. The mortgage assistance payments I had thought were going to the principal on their small ranch house had been applied to the loan only 14 times in 84 months. The other 70 times, the money had simply moved through their account and back out. So where had the other $320,000 gone? I filtered by withdrawal location, and a cluster lit up on the map like a rash. ATM withdrawals, 278 of them, almost all in cash, in amounts of either $300 or $500 at a time at one specific corridor of Casino, Arizona on the Salt River Reservation. Just off Loop 101. The casino accounted for approximately $176,000 across 7 years, almost $200,000 I had wired to my mother's checking account, which she had then withdrawn in carefully sized chunks at an ATM, 40 feet from a slot floor that was open 24 hours a day. There was a second, smaller stream. It ran to my sister, year after year, in steady, deliberate amounts, marked under labels like Dad Medical Copay and Home Roof Repair. I had been funneling money to Kennedy, $18,000 for Dad's pulmonary specialist in 2023, which turned out to have funded the deposit on a 1-year lease for the Audi Q5 in her driveway, $11,000 in 2022, labeled Home Repair, which had paid for a brand strategist, a logo redesign, and the first 6 months of Kennedy's lifestyle blog hosting, $9,000 in 2021, labeled Dad Cardiologist, which had paid for a 3-day shoot at a boutique hotel in Tulum where Kennedy had announced her new chapter as a lifestyle creator. The total to Kennedy, conservatively, was about $87,000. The total to the casino, about $176,000. The total that had legitimately gone to my parents' household needs, about $43,000. $378,000 minus $43,000 equaled $335,000 in misappropriation. I had financed my mother's gambling habit and my sister's lifestyle creator career for 7 years, while my mother told her cousins at Cracker Barrel that Doug and I are just trying to make it work on a fixed income. Fixed income, in this case, too, meant a 30-year-old hospital operations director with a fresh hysterectomy incision. I printed the summary to a single page on Mariana's Staples printer. 1 clean sheet, 12 rows, 84 months of evidence. Then Drew showed me one more thing. He had been scrolling the Holloway Tate family group text, a chain my mother had created in 2020 for family announcements, and he screenshotted a message my mother had sent Aunt Janelle in June. Before any of this, we covered Kennedy's whole new business venture ourselves. That's what good parents do when one child works harder than the other. I looked at that screenshot, and I looked at my one printed page, and something in me went very quiet and very level. I was not going to send an angry text. I was not going to explain or defend. I was going to let the paper into the room, in front of the same audience my mother had spent 7 years performing for, and then I was going to walk out and never fund the show again. It's handled, I said to Mariana, And for the first time, the words felt less like triage and more like a verdict. My mother discovered the canceled transfers the way she discovered everything that cost her something late, and at maximum volume. The first of the month came. No deposit landed. By Eleven A.M. Her name was on my phone screen. I let it go to voicemail twice. The third time I answered, because avoidance was the old me and the new me had a surgical binder and a spreadsheet. Her voice came through warm as fresh sopapillas, the voice she uses on church ladies and HOA presidents. Britty. Baby girl. Are you all right? Your daddy and I have been worried sick about you and that sweet baby. Worried, sick. The woman who said not our problem. I told her I was recovering. The incision was healing. The infection was gone. Drew had been home for 10 days. Beckett was thriving. Well, that is just a blessing, my mother said. There was a pause while she repositioned. I noticed the deposit didn't come through this morning. I just wanted to let you know in case there's some kind of mix-up with the bank. I know you have so much going on. Honey, I told her it wasn't a mix-up. Silence. Then the guilt. Right on schedule. Brittany Reaney, after everything your father and I did for you, after all the years we worked, after your daddy's lungs got bad and we kept on going, you know your sister has been struggling. And now your father is sick. And you're choosing this moment. I let her run. She circled back. The way she always did. To the one weapon that had never failed her. You know, Brittany, your sister never has these emergencies. And there it was. The third time I had heard a version of that sentence in 9 days. Except this time, I did not flinch, and I did not explain. I simply said, I know. Mama. And I let those 3 words mean something my mother had not intended. Kennedy never had emergencies because Kennedy had me. And now, Kennedy had a leased Audi Q5 she could no longer make the payments on. And a lifestyle blog whose ad partners were quietly winding down their contracts. And a Sedona retreat she could not afford to extend. What does that mean? Brittany, my mother said. Her voice tightening. What does that mean? You know I told her I had to feed the baby. I hung up while she was still talking. Which I had never once done in 30 years. When the mother fails, she sends the aunt. That afternoon, around 4 o'clock, Aunt Janelle texted me directly. Aunt Janelle is my mother's older sister, 63 years old. Lives in a small house in Sun City West. Drives a 2012 RAV4. Has a cat named Mr. Mister. Janelle had texted me maybe 5 times in my adult life. 2 of those times had been to ask if I could donate to a fundraiser at her parish. Her message was a paragraph of borrowed outrage. Brittany, I am beside myself. I just got off the phone with your mother. I cannot believe what I am hearing. Your father is sick. Your mother is barely getting by. And you have decided to punish them after your sister took 1 trip with her girlfriends. Your grandmother would be so disappointed in you. Family takes care of family. You need to do the right thing here. I read it twice. The line about my grandmother almost got me. Because Pearl was the one person in that family I had never wanted to disappoint. Then I remembered Pearl's actual words to me at her kitchen table in Marana the Easter before she died. When she had pressed a small white envelope into my hand and said, Britt, stop sending your mama any more of what you earn. Lloyd and I have been watching. Promise me. Baby. I had not opened the envelope for weeks after she passed. It had contained a card and a check for $300 and a note in Pearl's careful Palmer Method handwriting that said only, for you. Not for her. Janelle had it exactly backwards. So I did not write a paragraph back. I did not defend myself. I did not cry or apologize. I attached the single-page Mariana, and I had printed at the kitchen table, the one with 12 rows and 84 months on it, and I typed one sentence beneath it. Aunt Janelle here is where the money my mother says she gets by on actually went. The Salt River withdrawals are hers. As Kea. I put the phone down. I changed Beckett's diaper one-handed on the changing pad on the couch, with Drew holding his legs steady. The phone buzzed once. The little ellipsis of Janelle typing. Then it stopped. Then nothing. No reply came. Not that hour. Not that day. I imagined Janelle sitting in her Sun City West kitchen, reading 12 rows of numbers she could not argue with. Because that is the thing about a spreadsheet. You can call a person dramatic. You cannot call a column of withdrawals dramatic. It simply sits there being true. I had spent my whole adult life managing my mother's feelings, and Aunt Janelle's feelings, and my sister's feelings, and my father's silent submissions. It had never once occurred to me that the hardest thing I could do was hand them a fact and let them sit with it alone. I want to stop here for a moment, because if you have made it this far, you may be the person I am about to describe. I spent 7 years believing I was paying for my father's COPD inhalers and the mortgage on a small Mesa ranch house, and I was actually paying for a slot floor on the Salt River Reservation and a year's worth of Audi lease payments. If you have ever wired money on faith, pull one statement tonight. Just one. Cross-reference it with what the recipient told you it was for. Read it like it does not belong to you. If you do not have the password to your own parents' account because you trust them to manage what you sent, that is not love. That is religion. And, if this is hitting close to home, subscribe, because the next part is where my grandfather opens the portfolio. And what was inside, it broke something open in my family that no amount of casserole could put back together. My mother is many things, but she is never out of moves. When the warmth failed and the aunt failed, she reached for the one stage she controlled completely. She called a family dinner. The invitation came as a group text to the whole Holloway Tate chain on a Wednesday afternoon, framed in her best wounded matriarch register. Family. Let's all gather at our house this Sunday at 5 p.m. to welcome baby Beckett and clear the air. We love each other. And we can work through anything. Brittany. Sweetie. I hope you and Drew will come. And we can put this misunderstanding behind us. A misunderstanding. 15 days after she told my husband, my newborn son was not their problem. It was a misunderstanding. Drew read the text over my shoulder while Beckett nursed on the couch. And he said quietly, "Britt, you don't have to go. We don't have to give her this stage." I told Drew I wanted to go. I told him I wanted to go because my mother had spent 7 years performing a story about me and our family for the same audience, Aunt Janelle. My mother's 2 cousins, Estella and Wanda. My father's older brother, Russell, who lived in Tempe and whom my mother had spent 2 decades quietly cutting out of holidays. And my sister Kennedy, and the only place to end the performance was on the same stage. Drew said, "Are you bringing Beckett?" I told him I was. I told him I was bringing Beckett not as a prop, but because he was 6 weeks old. He nursed every 2.5 hours. And that was a fact that did not bend around my mother's dining room table. I called Lloyd that evening. I had not yet opened the portfolio. Lloyd had left with me at Banner. The portfolio had been sitting on my dresser for 15 days. I had carried it home from the hospital. I had set it down. I had not touched it. Lloyd picked up on the second ring. Britt. I told him about the dinner. I told him my mother had called it for Sunday. Lloyd was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Britt, have you opened my folder yet?" I told him I had not. Lloyd said, "All right. Don't. I'd like to bring it Sunday and open it there." "Is that all right with you?" I told him it was. He said, I'll come up Saturday afternoon. I'll stay at a motel by the airport. I'll pick you up at 4:15 Sunday. I'll drive. You don't need to be carrying that car seat with a fresh incision." He paused. "And Brit, don't tell your daddy I'm coming. Don't tell anyone. Let me walk in on my own." The morning of the dinner, I dressed Beckett in a soft cotton onesie with a tiny embroidered cactus on the chest, a gift my grandmother Pearl had sent me from a maternity store in Tucson 5 weeks before she passed. I packed his diaper bag 4 bottles. 6 diapers. 2 changes of clothes. The boppy pillow. The soft yellow blanket Drew's mother had crocheted. I tucked 1 folded sheet of paper into the side pocket. 12 rows. 84 months. The page Mariana and I had printed at our kitchen table. I dressed myself in a loose linen wrap dress that did not press on the incision. And I put on the small silver hoops Pearl had given me for my 21st birthday. Drew drove our Honda behind Lloyd's Silverado. Lloyd picked me up at 4:15 on the dot. Just as he had said. He was wearing the same Carhartt jacket and a clean button-down shirt I had never seen him wear before, pearl snap. Faded blue. The portfolio was on the back seat. On top of the car seat base where Beckett would ride. Lloyd moved it to the floorboard so we could buckle Beckett in. He did not say much on the drive. He turned the radio on low. KJZZ was playing an interview about water rights in the Verde Valley. Lloyd listened for about 3 minutes and turned it off. Brit, he said. Eyes on the road. I want you to remember something. Whatever happens at this dinner, you are not the one creating the trouble. You are the one finally naming it. There is a difference. Your grandmother understood that. I want you to remember, she understood it. I told him I would remember. We pulled into my parents' driveway in Mesa at 5 o'clock. The yard was already full of cars. Aunt Janelle's silver RAV4. Uncle Estella's husband's pickup truck. Sharon's minivan. Uncle Russell's old Tacoma. Which had surprised me. I had not seen Russell at a family event in 4 years. And Kennedy's leased Audi Q5. Which I noticed had a long scratch down the driver's side door. Lloyd killed the engine. He sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. Then he turned to me. Brit, I love you. Pearl loved you. Whatever Patty says in there. You remember that? I want you to walk in ahead of me with that baby. I want them to see his face before they see anything else. I'll come in behind you with the folder. I asked him what was in the folder. Lloyd said, Brit, I'm going to ask you to trust me one more time. Just like Pearl asked you to trust her with that envelope. Can you do that? I told him I could. He squeezed my hand. He picked up the portfolio. Drew got Beckett's car seat out of the Honda. The 3 of us walked up the path to my mother's front door, me with the surgical binder still snug under my dress. Drew with Beckett asleep in his car seat. And my grandfather Lloyd Holloway, 79 years old, in his pearl snap shirt and his Carhartt jacket, with a leather folder under his arm that contained the document my grandmother Pearl had spent the last 7 months of her life preparing, and that I would not understand the full meaning of, for another 45 minutes. I rang the doorbell. My mother's voice called out, Come in. Honey. The door's open. I turned the knob. We walked in. The first thing I saw when I stepped inside my parents' house was my mother. Standing in the front hall, with her hands clasped at her waist, wearing the dusty pink cardigan she had bought at Dillard's in Mesa Spectrum the year I turned 22. She had styled her hair. She had put on her good earrings. She had set the stage. Behind her, in the living room, the audience was already seated. Aunt Janelle, on the love seat closest to the kitchen. My mother's cousin Estella beside her, holding a small glass of white Zinfandel. Estella's husband, Marcus, on a dining chair, brought in for the occasion. My mother's other cousin Sharon perched on the edge of the recliner. My father in his usual armchair by the window. looking down at his hands. Uncle Russell, on a folding chair from the garage. The only person in the room who looked up at me directly when I walked through the door. My sister Kennedy on the leather ottoman in the center of the room, in a cream cashmere wrap I had paid for and did not yet know it. Her phone face down on her thigh in the only act of restraint I had seen from her in 27 years. Her skin was pink from Sedona. My mother started to cross the hall toward me with her arms out for a hug. Then she saw Lloyd behind me. And she stopped. Lloyd had not been invited. Lloyd was not on the group text. Lloyd was 79 years old in a Carhartt jacket and a pearl snap shirt, with a leather portfolio under his arm. And my mother's face did the small, involuntary thing faces do when a person walks into a room you did not write a part for. "Pops Lloyd," my mother said, recovering quickly. "Oh, what a wonderful surprise. Doug. Look who drove up. Pops. Please. Come in. Sit. Sit anywhere." My father lifted his head. He saw Lloyd. He stood up halfway out of his armchair and then sat back down. Lloyd said only, "Patty. Doug. I'd like a chair. Please, the straight one from the dining room. If it's all the same." Uncle Russell stood up immediately and went to get the chair. Russell brought it back and placed it 3 feet from the coffee table, in the open arc of the living room, facing the love seat. Lloyd sat down. He set the portfolio on his lap. He folded his hands on top of it. He did not say another word. Drew carried Beckett's car seat across the room and set it gently on the carpet beside my chair. Beckett was still asleep. The little embroidered cactus on his onesie rose and fell with his small breath. I sat down on the upholstered chair my mother had pulled close to the coffee table. I left the linen wrap on. I kept the diaper bag at my feet. My mother sat down on the love seat next to Aunt Janelle. She took Janelle's hand. Janelle did not take hers back, which I noticed, and my mother did not. "Well?" my mother said, brightening her voice. "I am so glad we are all together. This has been a hard month for our family. There has been a lot of hurt feelings on both sides. And I just want us to be able to sit down like grown-ups and clear the air." She looked at me. "Brittany, honey, I want you to know your daddy and I love you. We always have. And we love that beautiful baby boy. And whatever happened with the surgery, whatever was said between you and Drew and me, I am sure there is an explanation. And I want us to be a family again." She paused. The way an experienced speaker pauses to let her audience supply the next emotion. Estella made a small sympathetic sound. Marcos shifted in his seat. Janelle looked at her shoes. My father did not move. "You know," my mother said, settling into her rhythm, "your daddy and I have not had it easy. We did the best we could with what we had. We sent you girls to school. We kept a roof over your heads. We worked hard. And I think sometimes when you do everything for your children, they forget." She turned slightly. "The way you turn when you are addressing the room and not the daughter. And I will say this. Brittany has always been the strong one. She landed on her feet. She got the scholarship. She got the job. She has the beautiful house. The husband. The baby. And Kennedy, poor Kennedy, she reached across the love seat and patted Kennedy's knee. Kennedy has had to fight for everything. Her business. Her health. Her self-esteem. And so sometimes your daddy and I have to give a little more to the one who needs us more. And Brittany has never seemed to need us. And that is a compliment." She turned back to me with wet eyes. "And I just don't understand where this cruelty is coming from. Your sister never has these emergencies. Sweetheart, your sister doesn't decide to punish her parents over a misunderstanding about a wellness weekend. The 4th time, in a warm, crowded room with 8 people watching." My mother handed me the exact sentence she had used to leave my newborn alone. And she had no idea She had just loaded the weapon and passed it to me grip first. The room waited for me to cry or shout or crumble. I did none of those things. I reached into the side pocket of the diaper bag. Underneath the soft yellow blanket Drew's mother had crocheted. And I took out one folded sheet of paper. I did not stand up and make a speech. The incision and the binder would not have allowed it even if I had wanted to. I unfolded the page and smoothed it flat against my thigh with my left hand. I set it on the coffee table in the center of the room, where the late afternoon Arizona light from my mother's picture window fell across it. Then I said, in the same level voice I used to present a quarterly variance report, "You're right. Mama. Kennedy never has these emergencies. I'd like to show everyone in this room why." The room went very still. Janelle leaned forward despite herself. "This," I said, touching the top of the page, "is every dollar I have sent to this household over the last 7 years. $378,000. 84 months. The top rows are the legitimate spending. $38,000 for Daddy's lungs, his inhalers, his pulmonologist, his sleep apnea machine. About $5,000 toward the mortgage when it actually reached the loan. $43,000 total. Real medicine. Real bills. Real things I was proud to help with. I let that sit one beat. The rest," I said, "is the part Mama tells you all she manages on her own." I touched the page lightly. Not for drama. Just to guide their eyes. $176,000 in cash withdrawals over 7 years. 278 separate transactions. Almost every single one of them within 40 feet of the slot floor at Casino Arizona on the Salt River Reservation. A small sound went around the room, an intake of breath. The sound of a story cracking. Aunt Janelle made a noise I had never heard her make. Estella's hand came up to her mouth. And $87,000 to Kennedy. I said, including $18,000 once filed under Daddy's pulmonary specialist, so nobody would ask. That funded the deposit on the Audi out in the driveway. The $11,000 in 2022 marked home repair, that was the brand strategist and the logo redesign. The $9,000 in 2021 marked Daddy's cardiologist, that was a 3-day shoot at a boutique hotel in Tulum, where Kennedy announced her new chapter as a lifestyle creator. My sister's head came up very slowly. "That's where your card money comes from, Ken," I said gently. Because none of this was her fault first. It came from me. It always came from me. Kennedy's face did something I had never seen it do. The casual entitlement she had worn since she was 9 years old simply slid off. And underneath was a 27-year-old woman in a cashmere wrap she could not pay for. In a leased Audi she could not pay for. With a tan that had cost her sister $3,000. "Mom?" Kennedy said, her voice cracking. "Mom, is that true?" My mother's performance had nowhere to go. The tears she had summoned for sympathy were now just tears on a face caught in a full room. With no audience left to convert, her hand was trembling on Janelle's wrist. Janelle had not yet pulled away. But Janelle was not holding her back either. My mother opened her mouth to say something. I do not know what she was going to say. She got as far as, "That is twisted. Brittany, you have twisted all of those numbers. Your father and I have never," and that is when my grandfather set the portfolio on the coffee table next to my single page. The brittle rubber bands on the portfolio had to be coaxed off. They had been on it long enough to have left grooves in the leather. Lloyd opened it with the unhurried hands of a man who had waited 7 months for this exact moment. "Patty," he said, "please stop talking." My mother stopped. Even my mother. In 30 years of out-talking, every room she had ever been in, knew that Lloyd Holloway saying please in that voice meant something. Lloyd drew out a stapled document. It was thick. It was official. There was a Tucson law firm's embossed seal on the cover page, Mendoza. Hark? Reita. He set the document on the coffee table next to my single page. He laid the two pieces of paper side by side, the numbers and the trust. "This," Lloyd said to the room, not to my mother. "To the room is your grandmother Pearl's trust, and mine. Last spring, before Pearl got sick, we sat down with our attorney and her doctor, and Pearl moved most of what we had into this trust. Pearl was of sound mind. Her doctor signed an attestation, which is on page 3 of this document. She had been planning this for a year and a half before she did it. She had been watching." He paused. He looked at my mother. His face had no cruelty in it. It had something worse. It had clarity. "Patty, Pearl had been watching what you did with the money Brittany sent. She had her own bank in Tucson, and her own way of looking. Pearl asked me a year and a half before she passed to start keeping a record. So I did. Every check, every withdrawal, every story you told the cousins at Cracker Barrel. She had me trace it the way she traced her cross-stitch patterns. And what Brittany handed to this table just now is the same picture Pearl and I had assembled in this folder, except ours goes back 10 years instead of 7. He tapped the cover of the document. At the end, Pearl asked me one thing. She asked me to make sure that whatever was left of our life's work did not end up in the same place Brittany's salary had been ending up for a decade. So Pearl and I made a trust. The land in Marana, 12 acres. The parcel my daddy bought in 1958. The brick rancher. Our accounts at Pima Federal. The small life insurance. Everything moves into the trust. The trust has 2 beneficiaries." Lloyd looked at me. Britt, and Beckett. There is a fund for Beckett's education that becomes available when he turns 18. The rest is in trust for you, payable in increments over your lifetime. In a way, Pearl was very particular about. Pearl did not want you to ever again be in a position where you had to choose between a hospital bed and your son. So Pearl and I made sure you wouldn't be. The room was silent. Lloyd turned to my parents. "Doug, Patty, the house you are sitting in is on a half-acre your daddy bought from a neighbor in 1990. Your name is on the deed. Son. But the loan was carried by Pearl and me from the beginning. We refinanced it in our names in 2019. With your written consent. Because the bank would not extend you a new mortgage. The house is in our trust. When Pearl passed, it passed to Brittany. In trust. With a lifetime occupancy clause for the 2 of you. You can live here for the rest of your natural lives. You will not be put out. But you do not own this house. You have not owned this house since April of last year. You have been living in your daughter's house. The same daughter you would not drive 12 minutes to help on Tuesday." My mother's face did a thing I had never seen it do. The wounded matriarch mask simply fell off. And underneath was raw panic, because the kingdom she ruled, the story she had told for 30 years at Cracker Barrel and at the parish auxiliary lunches and to her cousins at the HOA Christmas party, had just been handed in a stapled document with 2 signatures to the daughter she had told not our problem. The room did not look at me. The room looked at her. What happened next is the part people always hope will be an apology. And it never is. And I want you braced for that the way I wish I had been. My mother did not say she was sorry. She cycled through everything else first. She wept loud and sudden. "Pops Lloyd. You cannot do this. Pearl wouldn't have done this. You manipulated her. She was on the morphine at the end. She wouldn't have," Lloyd said quietly. "Patty. Pearl signed this document in April. She passed in March of the next year. There were 11 months between her signature and the morphine. Her doctor was present. Our attorney was present. Mendoza signed. Park signed. Ryder signed. Pearl was of sound mind. We made very good, and sure she was." He paused. "My attorney says it stands. I have asked her 3 times. She has answered 3 times the same way. It stands." My mother turned to my father. "Doug, Doug, are you going to let them do this to me? This was your house. 2. This was your wife and your daughter ganging up on. My father lifted his head. For one moment. The same moment I had glimpsed 2 days earlier in a phone call, I had not yet told you about the call when he had picked up Lloyd's line at 6 p.m. on Tuesday and asked if I was all right, and my mother had taken the phone away. My father looked at me, and his mouth opened. Brittany is right. Patty, he said, barely a whisper. The casino. You know it has been. I have known. I have known. My mother's head snapped toward him. The look she gave him was 38 years old. And it was the look that had ended every argument they had ever had since 1987. My father stopped. He looked back down at his hands. And that was my father's last word on the subject. I felt something in me. Let him go. Gently. For good. My mother, abandoned even by her usual silence, turned to rage. You will regret this. Brittany Rennie. She hissed at me, the tears already drying because they had never been real. I will fight that trust. I will get a lawyer. I will tell every relative in this family what you and your grandfather did to us. You cannot just take a person's home. Lloyd answered before I could. Mild as milk. It was never your home. Patty. It was my daddy's. And Pearl's and mine. And now, Brittany's. And these things almost never go anywhere in court when the paperwork is clean. Almost never. He was careful with the word. An honest man. Even now. Kennedy was crying actual tears on the ottoman. Not for me. In the dawning horror of a 27-year-old woman realizing the well had a bottom, and that she had been standing on the person at the bottom of it, Aunt Janelle finally pulled her hand back from my mother's wrist. Janelle looked at the page on the coffee table. Then she looked at me. Brittany, Janelle said, very quietly, I owe you an apology. I sent you a text last week. I will be retracting. To everyone. She looked at Estella. She looked at Marcos. Marcos. Please drive me home. Marcos stood up immediately. He had not said one word in 45 minutes. He had been married to my mother's cousin Estella for 26 years. He had heard enough. Uncle Russell. In the corner on the folding chair. I did something, then I will remember the rest of my life. Russell stood up. Russell walked across the room. He put one hand on Lloyd's shoulder, the way one old man steadies another. Then Russell walked to the coffee table, picked up my single page, and held it briefly in front of my mother's face. Patty, Russell said, you owe my brother an apology. You owe Brittany an apology. You owe Pearl an apology. You will not get the first one from me. You will not see me at Christmas. Russell set the page back on the table. Russell nodded at Drew. Russell walked out the front door. I gathered my page. Lloyd gathered the trust document. I had one thing left to do. And it was the easiest thing of all. I stood slowly. Because the incision still did not allow for drama, even when the moment called for it. Drew picked up Beckett's car seat. Beckett had slept through the entire 45 minutes. I reached into the small zipper pocket of my purse and took out the soft gray hospital identification band I had worn for 5 days at Banner. I had not been able to throw it away when the nurse cut it off my wrist on the morning of my discharge. I had carried it home in my purse. I had not known why. I looped that small gray band once around the handle of Beckett's car seat and let it rest there. A piece of proof I would see every time I carried my son. Not the bank app. Not the spreadsheet. Not the folder. That little band was the whole story. The night I came up out of an emergency hysterectomy and my mother said, not our problem. My mother was still talking. Threat sliding into pleading now. Brittany. Honey. Please. We can fix this. We are still family. Beckett is still my grandson. You are going to regret this when you are old. But her voice had stopped being able to reach me. The way a song stops when you finally leave the room, it has been playing in Acts blank. I turned to Aunt Janelle at the door. Thank you for reading the numbers. Janelle, I know you will tell everyone the truth. It was not a threat. It was a fact. And she knew it. Janelle nodded. Then I looked at my father one more time. He met my eyes. He gave me a very small nod. It said, I understand. I am sorry. I cannot leave her. It is too late for me. I gave him a very small nod back. It said, I know. It is all right. I am still leaving. Drew opened the front door. Lloyd walked out behind us with the portfolio. The 3 generations my mother least wanted under one roof, Lloyd. Me. Beckett walked back out into the cold Arizona December evening. I pulled the door shut behind us with my left hand. Softly. Because slamming it would have meant I still wanted something from the people on the other side. I did not. The account was closed. Here is how it settled. Because I know you want to know. The trust held. My mother called 2 attorneys in January. Both of them told her the same thing. Mendoza. Park and Ryder had built the document carefully. Pearl had been competent. The witnesses were on file. The paperwork was clean. The threats quietly stopped. My parents still live in the house. Because the trust gives them a lifetime occupancy, I am not in the business of putting a sick old man out on the curb. Whatever his silences cost me. But the Salt River ATM no longer runs on my margin. And a casino without a steady deposit is just a sad room with carpet. My mother had to take a part-time job at the front desk of a chiropractor's office in Mesa in February. $15 an hour. 12 hours a week. She has told her cousins it is to stay engaged. She has told no one it is because the slot machines do not extend credit. Kennedy lost the Audi in February. The lease company repossessed it from the parking lot of a juice bar in Scottsdale at 3 in the afternoon. Kennedy posted a long, tearful video to her 28,000 followers about toxic family dynamics and the cost of being authentic. The video did not perform well. She lost 4,000 followers in the comment storm. She has since taken a job at an Anthropologie at Scottsdale Fashion Square, where she makes $16 an hour and a commission. She has not asked me for money. She sent me one text in April. It said only, "Where did it go?" I sent her the same single page I had set on my mother's coffee table. She did not reply. She has not asked again. Aunt Janelle told everyone the truth. Exactly as I knew she would. And the family chat went very quiet for a long time. Uncle Russell drives up from Tempe and brings Lloyd up from Marana on the first Sunday of every month. The 5 of us, Drew, me, Beckett, Russell, and Lloyd sit on our back patio, and we drink iced tea. And we do not talk about my mother. My father calls sometimes, but only ever when he is alone in the truck on a delivery run, which is rare now because he retired in the spring. He always asks about Beckett first. I always answer. We talk for 11 or 12 minutes. He always says, "Britt, I am proud of you," before he hangs up. I have not yet told him I love him back. I am not there yet. I think I will be eventually. Yolanda Fega, the night caregiver from the agency, stayed on 3 weeks while the incision healed. She still sends Beckett a card on his half-birthday. Mariana, Drew's forensic auditor's sister, sends me a copy of one of her own bank statements every January with a note that says, "Audit me anytime." Sister. It is the closest thing to a love letter I have ever received from family I did not give birth to. Lloyd sold his brick rancher in Marana in May and moved into a small rental 10 minutes from us in Chandler, where he comes for Sunday supper every week and brings the portfolio every single time and sets it on the bookshelf in our living room and says, in case anybody forgets, Beckett is 8 months old now. He has 2 teeth and a stuffed cactus he will not nap without. He calls Lloyd Pop Pop. If there is one thing I learned from a recovery room at Banner, a folder I did not open for 15 days, and 4 taps on a banking app at 11:31 on a Tuesday night in December. It is this. The people who praise you for being the strong one are usually just naming the person they have quietly decided they will never have to carry, and the day you stop being their bank is the day you finally get to be something better, which, for me, was simply a mother to my own son, instead of a parent to everyone who refused to grow up. That is my story. 7 years. A folder. And the truth, my whole family had buried. If this reminded you to read one statement tonight, or to write down a number you have never wanted to add up, or to check who you would actually call from a hospital bed at 11:31 p.m. on a Tuesday in December, take that as your sign and do it today. Do not wait for the surgery. Do not wait for the infection. Do not wait for a Tuesday night in December when the only person who will pick up the phone is a 79-year-old man with a folder he has been holding for 7 months. Make the call now. While you are still well. While the people you love most are still in a room you can walk into. If you know someone always cast as the strong one in their family, share this story with them. Tell them the strong one is allowed to put the folder down. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. And tell me the name of the person you would call from a hospital bed. I read every one. From a kitchen in Phoenix, with my son asleep in a bassinet and a grandfather coming up the road for Sunday supper, I am Brittany Holloway. And the only thing I ever needed, in the end, was the 79-year-old man who drove 1 hour and 47 minutes through the dark in a Silverado, walked into a recovery room at Banner, and said, "I'm what's left of it, in a hospital system." A leak is never ignored just because the building is still standing. You trace it, document it, isolate the source, and stop the damage before it spreads to the rooms where people are supposed to heal. For years, my family had treated my life like a supply closet with no lock, something they could open whenever they needed money. Excuse. Or rescue. While pretending the shelves refilled themselves, that night at Banner showed me that love without accountability becomes a broken process. It keeps taking from the person who notices the problem and rewarding the people who deny it exists. The spreadsheet did not make me cruel. It gave me a clean audit of a system I had kept alive at the cost of my own recovery. My son did not need a mother who kept bleeding money into other people's lies. He needed a mother who knew when to close the supply room, protect the patient, and finally, let the truth be charted where everyone could read it. Author Nguyen Van Chien.